World War II. An episode in history that will remain in the memory of humanity for a long time. Large-scale battles and confrontations gave rise not only to the creation of new technologies but also to new units. This story is about one of them, the Soviet SMERSH. A series of independent counterintelligence agencies, referred to as Stalin's instrument of death. Today it is considered one of the most secretive and effective Soviet agencies during the war. During the war's peak, the NKVD was available to the Kremlin. Its units, like Omsban, the separate motorized rifle brigade of special purpose, were already handling the Germans quite well. They eliminated 137,000 Nazis, 87 high-ranking officials, 2,000 agents, 30 tanks, and 20 armored vehicles, sent over 200 sabotage squads behind enemy lines, and deployed more than 7,000 fighters to support the Red Army. So why did Stalin create SMERSH? In 1941, the German army invaded the Soviet Union. The attack plan, developed by agents of the Abwehr, German intelligence service, allowed Hitler's forces to occupy one territory after another with almost no resistance. The NKVD had nothing to oppose the German agencies with. Unlike Soviet intelligence, the Abwehr focused only on the military sphere. So Moscow began considering the creation of new counterintelligence agencies that would more effectively oppose the Nazis.
It's important to clearly understand the enemy we faced in the first months of the war. German intelligence already had experience working in France and Europe in general. It defeated the Polish intelligence and approached our borders fully mobilized, with strong operational experience and skilled agents.
Therefore, on April 19, 1943, a secret document was issued declaring the creation of the counterintelligence agency SMERSH. It consisted of 3 divisions. The first was linked to the NKVD under the leadership of Beria. The second, to the Navy, headed by Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov. The third was the main directorate, led by Viktor Abakumov, who reported directly to Stalin. Although SMERSH was officially created in 1943, some historians believe its operatives were already working behind enemy lines long before.
They suggested the name "We Death to German Spies." And Stalin said, "Are spies only German? Let's just call it We Death to Spies, SMERSH."
During the war, all divisions actively participated in gathering intelligence. But the biggest contribution came from the structure that was directly subordinate to Stalin. The scope of SMERSH agents' activities was very broad, starting with security control within the USSR and beyond its borders, and ending with hunting down their own agents who failed to return from missions on time. The agents of the newly created agency fought both against anti-Soviet groups, the Russian Liberation Army fighting under Hitler's banners, and the OUN, which was fighting for Ukraine's independence. Though the main purpose was the search for and elimination of enemy spies. Primarily the Abwehr. SMERSH agents considered them their fiercest enemies. This was overseen by their chief, Viktor Abakumov.
Abakumov was a brave man. He repeatedly went to the front, speaking with our generals and officers, not from the rear, but at the front lines.
And at the same time he was a cruel monster. Western historians insist that he could calmly pick up a stick and beat a prisoner nearly to death with it. SMERSH agents had another task, to keep an eye on the Red Army soldiers. They were secretly infiltrated into the ranks of the military, where they kept personal files on suspicious soldiers. They focused on those who complained about the government, planned to desert, injured themselves to escape battle, or tried to defect to the Germans. Each of them was seen as a German Abwehr. Each was a potential spy, and such people were dealt with in the best traditions of the Kremlin, executed or tortured. Under such pressure, Moscow's army was completely demoralized.
If it hadn't been for the brutal repressions before the war, the front would have been much more stable. If there hadn't been any dekulakization, the children of peasants wouldn't have gone to serve Hitler. There are many reasons why Hitler managed to gather up to 1 million of our citizens under his banner, armed. Many of them served in auxiliary units, I understand. But the reason was primarily dissatisfaction with the Soviet government.
During the war, SMERSH agents managed to carry out 183 radio operations. Its goal was disinformation and neutralizing enemy intelligence. Agents would break encryption codes or recruit German radio operators into their ranks. Then, pretending to be German sabotage groups, they negotiated with Berlin. This allowed them to stop 400 German agents and prevent mass weapons and equipment shipments to Nazi-occupied territories. And if shipments were made, SMERSH agents already knew the location and quantity, which made it easy to seize them before the German military even knew about it. And Stalin deployed such radio groups across almost the entire front.
Disinformation was carried out in a centralized manner. Even when the enemy had their own intelligence points, recorded by security agencies, they would transmit some information against the backdrop of what had already been passed. A large amount of disinformation transmitted upwards was never uncovered.
One of the first radio operations was called Experience. It began right after SMERSH's creation and continued for a year, ending in 1944. The agents managed to send 92 telegrams to Germany and even receive 51. This allowed the Soviets to intercept tons of German resources, including German marks used to pay the re-recruited spies.
Organizing and carrying out a radio operation against the enemy using captured enemy intelligence radio stations requires careful preparation, adherence to special conspiracy rules, and a qualified approach to conducting the necessary agent operations. If conducted carelessly or incompetently, a radio operation can be turned against you.
Besides radio operators, there were many other specialists within SMERSH. The training at special schools turned them into versatile agents. Some were trained for specific tasks, like being sent abroad. Basically, all members of SMERSH were trained almost identically. Anyone could be both an ordinary observer, keeping track of unreliable soldiers, and a radio operator.
There were several schools and courses with their own specifics of work in the troops. There were 2 schools in Moscow. In particular, the first SMERSH school, the second SMERSH school. There were 2 schools during the war. There were different teachers there who taught the techniques of operational and investigative work. Encryption was also very important.
Why are SMERSH agents called Stalin's instrument of death? In addition to its main activity of eliminating enemy spies, the agency was also involved in interrogations. They tortured both others and their own. Mostly those who returned from captivity. Each of them was seen as a re-recruited agent. SMERSH actively contributed to preventing such people from returning to the war. Since this department was far from a punitive body, they did not have the right to detain, try, or execute people. But pre-trial executions are just the case when the accounting of the dead is not kept. Agents used any means necessary, regardless of the target. All were confined to a single camp, then interrogated one by one.
The SMERSH, counterintelligence, and others arrived. And they began to transport our prisoners of war from the western regions. Our soldiers who were captured. And here a cleansing was taking place, a check, how they got in, and so on.
The secrecy of SMERSH allows Russia to romanticize this intelligence service, despite Western historians viewing it as worse than the NKVD or KGB. For these people, the division of friend and foe did not exist. Because most of the data is unknown, historians can only speculate about the true atrocities committed against their people. Given the rhetoric of Soviet and Russian intelligence, it's easy to guess what SMERSH agents were really like.
SMERSH can be likened to Hitler's SS. This organization was no less murderous. I don't know how many people were shot or how many were sent to camps.
After the war, the performance figures of the SMERSH officers appeared. Some historians claim that the agency is credited with neutralizing 30,000 Abwehr agents and 3,500 saboteurs. Some say the USSR captured over 500,000 enemies, including Soviet citizens. Obviously, not all of them were spies. In Russia, military crimes by intelligence services are covered up not only in reports but also in films.
The main task of SMERSH was to oppose German agents on Soviet soil. In such stories, the heroes usually died tragically. When films about this started appearing after the war, no one made happy endings. The goal was to portray the spy hero as free from Stalinist repressions.
One of the most famous people in SMERSH was Alexander Kozlov, a lieutenant of the Red Army. He managed to carve a path for himself not only into SMERSH but also into the Abwehr. His dual identity greatly benefited the USSR, although it ended tragically for him. It all began in 1942, when during the battles near Smolensk, he had to hide from the Germans and join the partisan ranks.
My partisan unit was one of the largest, with up to 300 people. I fought against the German punitive units and carried out attacks on garrisons.
Together with his wife, the Germans caught him. They forced him to work for them in the counterintelligence department. Kozlov was to be sent behind Soviet lines to mislead them about German plans. The Red Army soldier was sent to special Abwehr courses and in 1943 was dropped behind the front lines. But instead of spying for the Germans, he surrendered to his own, where he was re-recruited by SMERSH. Kozlov's new task was to infiltrate the German Saturn intelligence center, recruit Abwehr agents and eliminate anti-Soviet military. He not only managed to return to the Germans but also rose to the rank of captain. In 2 years of undercover work, he recruited 7 agents and expelled the most radical anti-Soviet elements from the school.
This work Kozlov was doing, recruiting cadets, would sooner or later end badly for him. You simply can't walk on the edge of a razor forever and remain unscathed. Sooner or later, he would have run into a provocateur.
But it was his own who stabbed him in the back. In 1945 he was captured by American intelligence and handed over to the USSR. Since Kozlov had been in the hands of both the Germans and the Americans, no one trusted him. He was discharged and sentenced to 3 years in prison. His wife and child left him. And that's where the spy's story ended. His efforts and patriotism were crushed by the Soviet intelligence services.
Alexander Kozlov was rehabilitated only in the 1990s, when some wartime documents surfaced. After so many years in exile, his life improved. They even made several films about him, dedicated to his sabotage work in the Abwehr.
The image of SMERSH remains unsolved in the world to this day. In Russia, they are praised and equated to heroes, overlooking the murders of innocent people. The world still hasn't verified any SMERSH information, as it's mostly Russian. Nonetheless, the fact remains a fact. They managed to defeat the Abwehr agents, of course with the help of other intelligence services.
For the center, agents trained in Abwehr schools were of great importance. They underwent training, knew the personnel of these schools, and were familiar with their forms and methods of instruction. Such people could be worked with for the long term. If such an agent was re-recruited, they could be used to set up a radio operation or sent to the rear lines to maintain communication and gather intelligence.
By the way, SMERSH did not last long. In 1946 it disbanded and members scattered across other Soviet intelligence services. After the war, keeping such an agency was unprofitable and unnecessary. In 1954 the head, Viktor Abakumov, was arrested, sentenced to death for treason, conspiracy and many other crimes and shot the same year. This is where the history of SMERSH ended. No one mentioned it, no one spoke of it. Only occasionally, archival documents surfaced, and only those that were approved by the Kremlin.